Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. It's been a crazy week of college football action. It's the Week 8 reaction show. We're going to get into lots of crazy top 15 matchups in the SEC. Georgia dominates. Well, not so dominates. Outside of maybe a third quarter that left some things up for grabs, I would say. They control Texas. I think that's probably a better way to say it. Tennessee takes down Alabama on the third Saturday of October, the second time that they've done it at home in Neyland Stadium. We will discuss that one. Plus, we have some questions about Lincoln Riley, and we will address those here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. But we're also going to whip around all the college football and do it all here. It's the Week 8 reaction show on College Football Overtime. But before we dive into some of that action, got to welcome in my co-host, Dave Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. I got a lot to say on what we saw on Saturday, man. So let's just head straight into it, brother. Let's roll.
You know, I love that reaction. Let's just dive into the football discussion because the Georgia Bulldogs, they overcome Texas 30-15. They never trail in this game. It was one where they jumped out to a lead in that first half, and then it never went away, really. There was one moment there in the third quarter where Texas scores all 15 of its points. They throw the interception and trash is coming out onto the field, and it felt like it could be a turning point in that game, and it was into Georgia's favor. Texas does score. They cut it to one score. And Georgia fans all over America are starting to shake in their boots again. But it wasn't meant to be. Texas ends up failing its first test. They lose by 2 scores at home. Plus, I think they might have let the I don't know, the what is it? The cat out of the bag. What expression do you want to use? The toothpaste is out of the tube. Quinn Ewers was benched at the end of the first half. Arch Manning comes in. Quinn Ewers then comes back in the second half. But Manning didn't look so great. Quinn Ewers didn't look so great. But Quinn did look a little bit more prepared than Arch Manning did. But that's got to start. We got to start there because I feel like that needs to be the discussion point from this game. Is Texas in the midst of a quarterback controversy, Abe? What do you say?
Oh, first off, I disagree that that's the discussion point. And no, they're not in the midst of the quarterback controversy.
Okay.
Arch Manning comes in and immediately turns it over. So you can miss me with that 100%. This wasn't about Texas, man. And you're open. You hesitated to use the word dominate or manhandle. Like, don't. Like it should have been way worse if we're going to be honest. Like this was a Georgia team that still didn't play its best, but they played a lot better than what they had showed up to this point this year. 7 sacks, 1 interception, 3 forced fumbles on defense. They absolutely manhandled an offense from Texas that had been humming. And I had questions about that. I had questions going into the game about Quinn Ewers and if they could challenge you deep, and because that's not what they did against Oklahoma the week before. But we hadn't seen this Georgia. Like this Georgia defensive front hadn't shown up against Auburn or Mississippi State or Alabama or any of the other teams. If they would have shown up in the manner that they did, they would have beaten Alabama. This was a completely different Georgia team. And Garrett, the scary part about it, they didn't even necessarily play that good of a game on offense. You're talking about 3 interceptions. The receivers still continue to drop passes. Some of those cost Carson Beck interceptions, they certainly weren't all on him.
No.
This is a game that very easily could have been 45-15. And I almost view it from that lens in terms of the domination. That's how good I thought Georgia was. And it's just another statement to me that if Georgia does put it together on both sides of the ball, because they put it together on defense, I don't think you can argue against that. If they actually put it together on offense along with the defensive effort, they're going to win the national championship. Like there's just no team. I'm convinced after what we saw, there's just no team that can do what they can do on both ends, on both sides of the ball if they're playing at their best. Now the question is, in the big games when it matters, will they play at their best on both sides of the ball? This, though, to me, was about Georgia. Now we get to Texas because we had every question we asked of Texas, kind of, as you pointed out, they had a spotlight shown on them. The defense, it just isn't as good as the numbers say. Not a huge surprise. The offensive line had problems. Not a huge surprise. It's just not a big play offense. They can't run the ball with any consistency. None of those are surprises. They've been hidden because of the quality of offenses that they faced, right? But then they go up against a Georgia offense that can move the ball, a Georgia defense that can run with their receivers and deal with their offensive linemen. And there wasn't much for Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning to do. They were under assault immediately. The one-on-one wins for the Georgia defensive line, that's not on Quinn Ewers. The Texas O-line just could not deal with it. And so I do think you have to start asking some questions. The good news for Texas is they have a pretty manageable schedule. And so while this is certainly a setback for them, it really doesn't change the scope of what this season could be. Potentially setting up a massive end of the season, regular season game with Texas A&M, which we certainly got to look forward to. And it depends, obviously, what A&M does between now and then. They got some tough games. Same thing for Texas. But this, to me, is much more about what Georgia was able to do than what Texas was not able to do. But I do agree with you. Texas is not just going to run through the SEC schedule at this point. I think that's been shown.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. I mean, let's talk about winners first. I think that's actually a really good point. I respect that thought. So, and maybe I mean, look, this was exactly what we thought was going to happen with Texas. Well, it was exactly what we were worried would happen with Texas. It's not that we thought it was going to happen. We thought it was going to happen, but look, this is a Texas team that's good. This is a really good football team. It's just they hadn't played a team of their ilk. And that became very clear very early in this game. Georgia, on the other end of the spectrum, has faced several teams that are really, really talented, and they've been pushed. And that is the value in having that sort of schedule in the early part of your schedule. When you face dominant types of teams, I mean, the defense finally looked like the defense that we expected to see throughout the course of this season. It was the defense that we saw week one. You know, and you know what the biggest factor in that is? They were healthy. A lot of the guys on that defense were not playing at 100%. And look, no one's ever going to be at 100% throughout the course of a regular season. It's impossible in any level of football. I don't care if you're talking high school, college, pros, doesn't matter. You're never going to be 100% healthy. But when your best players are banged up in the way that a lot of these Georgia front seven guys have been, and even on Saturday, they weren't at 100%. Small Munden, he missed this game. And then you have Dan Jackson and others missing the final parts of the fourth quarter with targeting calls, which I don't want to get too deep into officiating. We will at some point because it needs to be addressed, but I don't want to get to not this very second. So Michael Williams, Jalen Walker, those two guys have been dealing with injuries. They've been nicked up over the course of the regular season to this point, but they jump in here. They manhandled this Texas offensive line. I mean, 7 sacks in this game, 10 tackles for loss. They were getting after Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning in this entire rushing attack that they held to 29 yards on the ground. I said on the preview show that we did, Texas has to run the ball effectively. And if they were going to find success in this game, they needed to run the ball well. This isn't the type of game where Quinn Ewers was going to be able to drop back and just throw passes over the middle and just complete it willy-nilly. That was never the way that this game was going to go. They didn't get the support that they needed on the ground. Now, it's just the fact that the inverse happened for Georgia in this game. I called out Trevor Etienne heading into this game. He was the number one person for me on that offense, besides the obvious with Carson Beck, who ended up playing probably one of the worst games of his career in that first half. Trevor Etienne was exactly the guy that Georgia needed in this game. He stepped up. He got tough yards. It's only 87, but those were 87 tough yards. He also gets into the end zone 3 times. I mean, look.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick and just back you up on this. The impact is more impressive than the numbers will display for ETN. I think that's what you have to look at, because the box score is not going to make you open your eyes like too crazy outside of the touchdown total. The impact on that game, however, was massive.
Yeah, there was instances where it was like 3rd and 6 or something, and they felt comfortable turning around and handing off. It was like a 4-down scenario where you're probably going to go for it on 4th down. But you turn around and hand it to Trevor Etienne, and he takes it the distance, and he gets all of it on one play. And the dude, he ran tough. He ran behind his pads, and it was one of those types of performances that won them this football game. It was critical, especially on a day where Carson Beck doesn't get to the 200-yard mark. He throws 3 interceptions. Granted, I don't think all of those were necessarily his fault, like you mentioned, but it was a complete team performance on everybody except for the person we thought had to have a perfect day. And that's just the personification of college football. Defense does that though. Like if Georgia's defense continues to play at that level, I'll agree with you. I don't think there's a team in America that can beat them. If they're playing at that level and that offense played that poorly, they only go
Yeah.
for 110 on the ground. Like they didn't do a whole heck of a lot on offense. It's just the fact that they really held Texas to 7 or 8 points, really. They had one successful drive throughout the course of this game. The other one was set up off of the interception that came down to about the 10-yard line. So if you play at that level, I don't care if you're Oregon, Ohio State, anybody, you are not beating this team because I don't expect that offense to play that up and down throughout the course of the rest of the regular season or into the playoffs. But if the defense travels like that, they're going to be a damn near impossible out for anybody in America. But this does get me into this next point, and I think we need to discuss it quickly. The Texas fans throwing trash and everything out, the beer bottles and everything else, not bottles, but beer cans out onto the field. It was an inexcusable action from the Texas fans. It was an awful sight. It was bad. Look, the pass interference call was bad. It was the incorrect call. It was also the incorrect call for the officiating crew to sit through this wait and sit through this period of when they suspend action for cleaning up the fans' debris and everything else that's coming out onto the field, and then for them to come out and reverse the call it's interesting. It's very interesting, and it's unprecedented. I've never seen something like that in college football ever at any point. And it does call into question. Look, the call I feel like was incorrect. I mean, Kirby said the
The
wrong guy
original
was
call.
called or whatever. The original call. Kirby says it was happening in a different spot. I need to go look at the actual play and see if there's another piece of holding or pass interference at some other spot that he was calling for. But whatever they were showing on the replay was not a defensive pass interference. I get that fact, and I agree with that. But to go in to administer the foul and then wait and sit by and then reverse the call, it was inexcusable what the officiating crew did.
So I want to take this from two aspects. Let's start with the fans throwing stuff on the field. I'm not going to crush Texas for this.
Well, it's not on Texas.
No,
It's
I know.
not on
I
Texas.
just every
Yeah.
fan base does that.
Yeah.
We've seen Braves fans do that. We've seen fans across any
Tennessee
sport.
fans did it
Yeah.
with the mustard
So
bottle.
I'm just not going to say anything about Texas. I think it was them in this situation, but they're no different than Tennessee could do it. Ole Miss could do it. Heck, even Georgia fans could do it. You got to have a good arm to get over the hedges, but you know what I'm saying. So the fans are going to be fans. Drunk students are going to be drunk students. The school's been fined, and they're going to try and take some steps to punish those who were involved in including banning them from future events. Look, I was watching the Atlanta Falcons game today. They overturned a pass interference call that they had originally called. The difference was it happened in the moment. The difference was they call it, they then get together, huddle up, and then they decide contact was incidental, blah, 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 and they make their move. It wasn't a 3-minute or 4-minute delay, in which case I don't know if the officials got together and talked about it. I don't know if it was buzzed in from the command center in the stadium or potentially the command center from the league office. I don't know exactly what went down. And that's what's a little bit nerve wracking. If that call we've seen calls get overturned. We've seen the officiating crew get together, discuss things and change the decision, but it happens in the moment. It happens within the next play. And the problem is if the fans don't throw anything on the field, another play is run. They don't have time to overturn and discuss and do all this, and it doesn't happen. So you've got to figure out the formula and the method that it took for this to be overturned. And if it needs to be addressed, it has to be addressed. Like you said a while ago, it's a good thing it didn't impact this game. In terms of the eventual result, eventual winner, I'm okay with the call. I understand why, if what they showed was what it was overturned, but how they got to the point of overturning it is a problem.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about this in terms of this game, because I do want to get into some of these other games that we did see over the course of the weekend. I just want to punctuate and send home how important this Georgia defense, that performance was for the future prospects of this team. I mean, you look at the efficiency numbers of what Georgia was able to do on just on third down. So Texas doesn't get a third down conversion until the very end of the third quarter. They were 0 of 9 and then 0 of 10, I think, and then it was like 1 of 11. That's when they finally converted something. And then it's not like they would fail on third down and set up a really successful fourth down play, because Texas was also 1 of 5 on fourth down. This team put together a full, complete effort, and it started with the play of the defense. That's the reason that Georgia won. That's the reason that Georgia is now in the driver's seat of the SEC. I understand you have a couple of teams that have to play each other, but now at this instance, Georgia is in charge, and they showed that the college football world still goes through Athens until further notice. But let's move into some of these other games, because there's another game that really it was a bit crazy here. Tennessee and Alabama. The Vols take down Alabama. The Crimson Tide on good old Rocky Top for the second time in Rocky Top in consecutive appearances. The cigars were lit, and it was a pretty fantastic performance in the second half. That's the third consecutive game that Tennessee has been shut out in the first half. Alabama was not able to take advantage of this fact, however. I felt like Alabama had a couple of opportunities to really take a stranglehold of this game in the first half, and they just missed every opportunity in it. Jalen Milroe played another not so great game in this one, and they go into the locker room 7-0. It could have been at least 14-0, but he had another interception that cost them that opportunity. But in the second half, Tennessee really asserted itself, and I feel like Nico, he got knocked out of the game for a moment and then comes back in, and it's almost like he got knocked back into gear, because Tennessee comes back in the second half. He plays at a higher level. Dylan Sampson, though, I can't say enough good things about Dylan Sampson. He's the reason that they've won each of these last two games specifically. Dylan Sampson has been that good. He does it again, 139 yards and a touchdown. He's been held under 100 yards rushing in just one game this season. He is the reason that Tennessee is in the position that they are in right now. And Nico, I felt like, got better as the game went on. He started off kind of slow here, and Tennessee's got their work cut out for them. They're not going to be able to perform like that throughout the course of their season. And look, if you go to Athens and perform like that, you're probably not going to get a win. But look, Tennessee was able to knock off their boogeyman. Alabama is somebody who has struggled recently, and I think that this team is on a downward trend right now. They're not playing with a lot of confidence, I don't think. And look, the team in and of itself is just not playing very well. I wonder at what point they're going to get back on the rails. You have Missouri coming to town now, and Missouri's another team that's trending in the wrong direction. But look, it's an identical sort of situation that Alabama found itself in at the beginning of this week. You're playing another team that's struggling. Two teams looking to keep their season on the rails. Alabama, it's starting to come undone.
Well, boy, let me take it from this way, because I think this one general statement will impact both teams. I think what we saw from the Georgia Bulldogs is that one game can change perception in a very strong manner, right? Georgia was really on the wrong direction as well. They walk into Austin, Texas, do what they do. And we're like, hey, this is the team to beat for the championship. We didn't know if they were even going to make the playoffs, before that game. And I think that's what we're looking at with both of these teams, is that one game can really change perception. And I think we'll start with Tennessee. It has absolutely changed the perception of this team and what they can accomplish. Look, Nico still has to be better. I agree with you. They still need to trust him more in big situations to find big plays. He found some in the second half, and it was the difference in the game. I talked to you about Dylan Sampson. He's an outstanding running back, but it feels like a lot of times he goes for $150 and 2 touchdowns, and it doesn't have the same impact necessarily on the game that you would think a running back going for. They're always in those games. You would think if he has that big day. So it's got to be about Nico. As great as Dylan Sampson is, and he is, it still has to be about Nico. And when they needed Nico to step up down the stretch at the end of this game with his arm, he absolutely did. Now, for Alabama, Defensively, obviously, you got to tighten up in the second half after a very strong first half. Offensively, I just don't think they're maximizing Jalen Milroe. I don't understand why he's not going on more designed runs. And now, I know he officially ran the ball for 14 carries in this game. I think a lot of that was scrambling and trying to evade. He had a 10-yard run in one run for 10 yards, and he had 11 on the day. They're just not running him the way they used him against Georgia in the first half, and I don't know why. Maybe he's hurt, and they're not telling us. I don't know. But look, there was a whole first half of a season last year where Jalen Milroe was playing the way he is now. He got benched, and we're like throwing our hands up and hey, what's happening? And then the second half, they found it. They figured out what ignites the offense, and they got him going to the part where he was almost a Heisman. So maybe that's what you're hoping for if you're Alabama, is that you can find whatever got into Jalen Milroe the second half of last year and find that again this year, because there's no reason that with Ryan Williams, that quarterback should be as controllable, I guess, as he is. Now, the Tennessee front, as we expected, did a great job. They forced 2 interceptions. They got 3 sacks on Jalen Milroe, and that doesn't include, again, all the tackles for loss or short gains when he was declared as a runner. So very good job by the front. This is just a hard-fought game for Tennessee. They were never out of it. This game was competitive all the way throughout. I almost can't believe these two teams got into the mid-20s, or at least that Tennessee did. I mean, it was ugly for a long time in this game. But I agree with you. They've got to find a way to be a little more explosive, more creative on offense. You just have to wonder, and I know they got Georgia coming up in a couple of weeks, if Dylan Sampson's going to be able to run like that against Georgia, because if not, and it does really fall to Nico, is he going to be able to deliver?
Yeah, I mean, look, Alabama, I want to finish this on Alabama, and then I'll move into Tennessee, right? You mentioned the running ability of Jalen Milroe, right? And it's what makes him special is his ability to use his legs and his athleticism to get out of the pocket and really put stress on the defense. They haven't done it. They haven't used it at that level, and he may be hurt. I think that's really probably my only thought. Why they're not doing it, but also, where's his support? Where is anybody else in that backfield? Jam Miller, Justice Haynes. These are 2 guys who were supposed to be really high-level running backs for this Alabama team, and they just haven't been. Like, zero sum. They have not been good. I mean, they've been held under 104 yards rushing in each of their last 3 games. One of those fronts was Vanderbilt. South Carolina is not exactly, we know that they have a really strong pass rush. They're not necessarily super effective against the run. They're more effective at getting back and punishing drop back passers. But Alabama has not been able to run the ball with any level of effectiveness. And when you have a guy like Jalen Milroe in your backfield, that opens up everything. So I don't understand why this has been such an issue. Because if he's playing, I'm assuming he's healthy, right? I think it's foolish to necessarily to just assume that he's not healthy. But you got to do better. Because I'm looking at both of these teams. I don't think either of these teams are playing at a playoff level. I really have a hard time thinking that either of them deserve consideration. Now, based off of the resume and the rest of the season might dictate otherwise. If they both win out, they'll both be in. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. But based off of the way that they're playing right now, they have some serious issues. And now let's move into Tennessee. Like you talked about their explosiveness. They had no explosiveness. There was no explosiveness in this game. You're not going to be able to sit there and hope that Dylan Sampson can carry you on a week-to-week basis. Dylan Sampson's not that kind of back. He's really good, right? But you have matchups down the stretch. It's a manageable stretch, but I don't think you beat Georgia just by turning around and handing it off to Dylan Sampson. You need something else in this offense. Brew McCoy was able to pop off a little bit in this game, but ultimately, this has just been not very good. I mean, the defense has been strong for Tennessee. The defense has been strong, and it did a lot of good things here on Saturday, but I just got to see more. I got to see more from this Tennessee team. they're not going to have a ton of opportunities. Look, if you just continue to win, you'll control your destiny and you'll play your way in. But they're out of the driver's seat right now, and there's just been nothing convincing me since they lost to Arkansas a few weeks ago. I've not seen anything from Tennessee that convinces me that they're a legitimate contender, not just to win an SEC championship or even play in one, but I just feel like there's another loss coming here on this schedule. Kentucky is not a slouch of an opponent. We just saw them get smashed by Florida, but Kentucky, I mean, if they have that good performance in them, and if they come out and play at a high level and they quell Dylan Sampson a little bit, what is the recourse for Tennessee right now? I don't know if there is one.
I think you're going a little too far, if we're going to be honest. I think we also just sat and watched the Georgia team, I would say very similar things about until the defense showed up with that sort of effort. So I'm not going to put it past Tennessee to find that sort of effort. You got to remember that Nico is a freshman, and I think they have been protecting him. And at some point, and I've said this for a couple of weeks now with you, at some point you just got to let him open it up. And maybe they're starting to slowly do that. As they gain confidence. I'm sure this game specifically was a big boost of confidence for him. But look, what this really did was allow Tennessee to lose to Georgia and still stay in the playoff discussion. Mm-hmm. And that's what this win really does. If they win outside of the Georgia game, and that might include a tough game at the end of the year with, believe it or not, Vanderbilt, they're going to have the opportunities. But that's what this win really did. I do tend to agree with you that again, just like Georgia, I hadn't seen it, but we felt it was there. I do feel like it's there for Tennessee. I do feel the offensive explosion is possible. I feel like they have a quarterback that can do it if they would trust him, but we haven't seen it yet. And so until we really do see it, maybe we're just kind of playing that waiting game. But yeah, for me, what this did is give them the ability to lose to Georgia and still make the playoffs, and that's a big deal for Tennessee.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I'm not going to sit here and put losses on their schedule necessarily, and I don't intend to do that. But the team just hasn't looked completely sound. That's all. The offense specifically, the defense has played at a high level, and ironically, the thing that I had the most question marks about was their defense, not their offense, and now it's completely flipped. The script is. The offense is not doing very well. And I just need to see them put together a more complete effort on a more consistent basis, and then I'll buy in. But just as of right now, I'm not super bought into the Tennessee Volunteers. But big win there, though, for Rocky Top. I mean, anytime that Tennessee beats Alabama, that's huge. They rush the field, they tear down the goalposts, and it's always a beautiful sight up there in Tennessee, in Knoxville, Tennessee. But let's move over to Fayetteville, Arkansas, where the Bengal Tigers of LSU, they control 34-10. They're the winners in this one. Caden Durham is the story in this one. Garrett Nussmeier doesn't have to do it all. And I think that's really important for LSU. So I quickly want to talk about this one because LSU, alongside of Texas A&M, who won really tight. It was a tight game with Mississippi State here for a while, which Mississippi State, kudos to those guys. The three biggest games that they've played this year in the SEC, Texas, Georgia, and now Texas A&M, they've been in the game all three times. I don't think they ever really had a chance of winning any of those three games, but they've played really, really tough. And here for LSU, those are the two teams on top of the SEC right now. Texas has a loss. Georgia has a loss. Alabama has two losses. Tennessee has a loss. Outside of that, it's LSU and A&M. And the Tigers, they finally do it with a rushing attack. Caden Durham has been steady, not super explosive necessarily, but he gets to that 100-yard mark. Just barely, 101 yards here for him. But he also gets to the end zone three different times. Taylor Green is pretty effectively held in check. LSU, I think they're finding their legs, not just on offense, but on defense, more importantly.
Yeah, look, I thought that win last week was going to be a springboard for Nussmeier. And I know I agree with you. He didn't get the touchdowns. He wasn't asked to do a ton. Thought he was efficient, though. 23 completions in 34 attempts.
But it's good that it's not just him.
Yeah, no, I agree. And they've been asking, they've been begging that Caden Durham takes over that role ever since they lost down 2 or 3 starting running backs before him. And he was held in check a little bit last week, but got back off and going this week. And I think you're still going to see more development in that pass game for Nussmeier. But you're right. This is a defense that forced 3 turnovers, an interception, and 2 fumble recoveries. Was all over Taylor Green for the majority of this game, and didn't allow any rushing. They were very good on the ground defensively against the run for Arkansas. And so you're just starting to build. And it's just one of those things where I don't think they're necessarily the best team in the country. They're the team that's like, they could get hot. They could randomly get hot. And we've seen LSU a couple times like randomly get hot. Obviously with Joe Burrow offensively, they got hot. Even with Jaden Daniels a couple of years ago, offensively, they got hot. I don't know if we're going that far. But just their overall talent doesn't feel like it, but they still somehow seem dangerous. So I am keeping my eye on them, but obviously they got a real gut check game coming next week on the road against Texas A&M. If they're able to go into Kyle Field and win that game, and I know we'll talk about that game when we do our preview show for week 9 in a couple of days. But that's going to be a real like eye opener if they're able to go into Kyle Field and win that game. That says, hey, Georgia, hey, Texas, hey, Tennessee, like you might need to take LSU a little bit more seriously than you have. I still think they're flying under the radar despite being in the top 10. It does feel that way. A win next week changes that though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's a gut check game. That's a great way to call it. It's a great term for it. And I think that's going to be critical for LSU, not just in just the perception of this team, because I know we talked off air when we were doing college football game time on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game in Atlanta. We were just sort of discussing the fact that this team is flying under the radar and they have the one top 10 win. That's really their only marquee win of the season. I understand you control Arkansas. You do it with defense. More importantly, 38 yards rushing or so. They're held under the 50-yard mark on the ground, which is awesome for this LSU front. And outside of, but you look down the schedule, you got Ole Miss. That was the 3-point win. I feel like you were on to something when you called that, when you said it was a springboard game. I think that was really the best way to look at it because they start the season off with the loss to USC. There was a potential that this season could get ugly, but you survive on the road in Columbia against South Carolina. You control a not very good UCLA team, and then you just start building and building and building. And the important thing with college football, especially in this day and age, is it's not how you start, it's how you finish. If you improve steadily throughout the course of a season, they're going to give themselves an opportunity to play for an SEC championship and potentially jump into the college football playoff. They're in the discussion right now. They're firmly, squarely rooted inside of the discussion. But the thing is, your next 2 games, you're going to learn everything that you need to know against LSU about LSU. You got the win against Ole Miss. That's big. That's big. And I'm not trying to undersell that. But if you go on the road and you get a win at Texas A&M, then you defend home field and you beat Alabama. Okay, check. You're in. Like that. You're firmly in the driver's seat of the Southeastern Conference at that point, because then it's Florida, Vandy, and Oklahoma to finish the season. 3 teams who I feel like at that point are really going to be scuffling. No offense to Vanderbilt, the juggernaut giant killers, but look, Oklahoma's reeling. Florida, I mean, they had a huge win. I will say they seem very hot and cold, but we'll see. Florida will be in the midst of the brutal November stretch that a lot of people spent a lot of oxygen discussing over the course of the offseason. But LSU, they got a gut check coming. And I think if they can pass those tests, they will buy themselves a ticket. They will punch their ticket to the college football playoff. If they just win each of their next 2 games, I don't know how many losses they would end the season with, but you win each of the next 2 weeks, you're pretty much in. You're pretty much in at that point. But LSU, I had a lot of questions, and they're slowly being answered, and that's really the important thing. I want to move in outside of this. Did you have any more thoughts on this one before we move on? All right. So the USC Trojans, they lose again. And it was not a good performance. They were in charge of that game against Maryland. They should have won that game against Minnesota. They had an opportunity to win that game against Michigan. But Lincoln Riley continues to falter. They have not played at a high level at all this season. In fact, they didn't play at a high level at all last season, really. And you have the reigning Heisman Trophy winner on that team. He moves on, and now he just lost his 12th game. He lost 10 games in 5 years at Oklahoma. He played in multiple college football playoffs, and the experiment is just not working right now for the USC Trojans. And I think he's got a worse record than, oh shoot, Clay Helton. I think it was Clay Helton. I was going to say Steve Sarkisian, but that's not right. Clay Helton had a better record, and he was fired. He also had a Rose Bowl championship. But look, you have a 28-14 lead and 13 minutes left in this game, and you find a way to lose. And I've said this many, many times. Great teams find ways to win games where they don't play their best. Bad teams find ways to lose games where they do. And USC is now 3-4 on the season after consecutive games with a blown 14-point lead. That's inexcusable for the Trojans.
I think you're way ahead, way over your skis on this one right now. You're coming off 2 years ago, a Heisman winner. He's supposed to be a quarterback whisperer. Miller Moss ain't it. I don't think we're burying the program just because of this guy. I think he's 10th right now, if you believe recruiting rankings, which is its own discussion. He's 10th overall in team recruiting rankings. I think that's good enough on its own. In the Big Ten, he trails just Ohio State and Oregon, and then like the half of the SEC. But yeah, I think you're getting way too ahead of yourself. I also think, and look, I've been sitting here like begging Florida to fire Billy Napier. But I also think there is a grass is greener mindset when everything goes sour. And it's just like, are you really going to hire someone better than Lincoln Riley? I don't know. You were pretty close to playing for a national championship 2 years ago. You have a terrible loss on a Thursday night, if I remember, maybe to Utah or whatever it was. Maybe that was in the title game. I don't remember, but like, yeah, I think it's a down year. There's no denying that. Last year was also bad defensively, even though the offense was outstanding. But yeah, I don't think we're there yet.
USC's 5-9 in the last 14 games. They've now had the 12 losses that Lincoln Riley has had at USC. 5 of them have featured blown 14-point leads. I'm just saying there's a legitimate question starting to circle Lincoln Riley and his future at USC. He needs to start winning, and he needs to start winning now, because I don't think it's going to get better at this point. The season is going off of the rails, and they started the season 2-0. They've lost 4 of their last 5. The heat's going to start turning up here very soon. I don't think he's going to be fired yet. But the thing is, if he keeps dropping football games, I don't know what the answer is going to be. And I understand where you're coming from with the grass is always greener type of situation. This is USC team that's a blue blood program that's expected to win championships. They're expected to play at a high level each and every week. But it just hasn't been up to snuff here under Lincoln Riley. You're getting a massive investment and you're just not getting that return. But let's move into something else. We'll keep tabs on that as the season goes on. I do want to briefly talk about the Miami Hurricanes. They survive another ACC foe, 52-45 win over Louisville. The defense is just not good enough right here for Miami. It's good enough down the stretch, but it may not matter all that much because you have Cam Ward, who is just a freak of nature. They go for it on 4th down. I think they're on like the 25-yard line or something like that. They asked somebody on the team, and he said, why'd you guys go for it? He says, well, if you guys can stop our offense 4 consecutive plays, then kudos to you, which I think is just very apt for the Miami Hurricanes. But they score 52 points, scoring 10 points or more in every single quarter, 14, 14, 14 in the second, third, and fourth quarter. But look, this was a slugfest of a game because Louisville, they matched them just about punch for punch. Cam Ward is just a freight train. And if anybody forgot that he was right there squarely in the mix for the Heisman Trophy, then they were just firmly reminded of it. 319 yards, 4 touchdowns here for what some people might consider the front runner for the award. Damian Martinez also does a lot with his legs. 222 yards on the ground. Xavier Restrepo just continues to be a beast through the air. He finishes with over 100 yards and a touchdown, including another long of 63 yards. But look, the Miami Hurricanes, I'm curious what happens when they face a team that can slow down that offense just a little bit, but I wonder when or if that actually happens this season.
Yeah, I look, I was very impressed with Miami on Saturday afternoon. This is the sort of game I feel like they're going to be in more often than not, and so it's good to see them comfortable trading blows. It's also good to see that they didn't need the officials' help to win this one, even though people were trying to claim it at one point. I get that.
Tried.
They
They
tried.
tried.
But no, no. Look, this is the sort of game that I expect Miami to be playing in and winning. I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of ACC opponents that can kind of push them in this manner. It's the other manner which I would be surprised by. So I think it was a very good showing for Miami. I think it showed you how they're built to win games, and that is offensively and electrically. So I'm ready to roll with them.
Yeah, no, they're just gonna win. They're just gonna score, 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 score. I don't know if there's anybody on that schedule who's gonna be able to score with them down the stretch until they get to the ACC championship game and play Clemson. Because I mean, SMU, I mean, they're a fun story, and I just don't think that SMU is gonna be able to keep pace in the ACC with those guys. And we'll see. We'll see what they can continue to do. But let's move up to the Big Ten because Indiana, talking about offensive just powerhouses, Indiana dominates Nebraska. If you thought that they were going to score 56 points in this game, you were probably alone. On top of that, if you thought that they were going to hold Nebraska to just 7 points, this was an obliteration, an absolute obliteration. But the other side of this coin is the fact that they lost their starting quarterback at halftime. Curtis Rourke didn't play the second half. I mean, he goes 17 to 21, has a buck 89, has the touchdown and the interception. They're up 28-7, and then they just double that score in the second half. It is just an unbelievable display for Kurt Signetti. That offense is just electric. And I don't think it was getting enough love, but I think it's going to start getting some love now.
Yeah, you got Taven Jackson who comes in for Curtis Rourke. He is a former Tennessee quarterback transferred in. He goes 7 of 8, 91 yards, 2 touchdowns. And so he had the offense rolling. I was more impressed defensively. We knew Indiana could score. They've been in the 40s or higher all season long. To hold Nebraska down to 7, I think is pretty impressive. And they've been rewarded by hosting College Game Day this coming
Yeah.
week. And even without the quarterback, interested to see the scenes there at Bloomington.
Yeah. 3 interceptions for Dylan Raiola in this one. And it's a game where, look, man, it'll put some hair on your chest. It's one of those games where it's a grow up type of game. And if you're not, you need to be able to win these types of games. If you're that kind of quarterback who's going to be crowned before taking a single snap under center, you got to be able to grow up in a hurry. And look, a lot of to whom much is given, a lot is expected, and that's sort of the expectation for Dylan Raiola, fair or not. But look, it was a blitzkrieg from the start. Indiana gets what is it, 28-7 here, 21 points in that second quarter. And it felt like it just came off the rails at that point, and they just continued to just pummel Nebraska here. And at what point is Nebraska considered a potential upset team in the Big Ten Conference? They finished the season. You get Washington, Michigan State, and a very vulnerable Michigan team that we'll talk about here in just a moment. You have the game against Ohio State on the road, and then it's Purdue. That's a very manageable stretch. And if you can go, I know we talked a little bit about on the preview show. What if they do go 10-2? And I was kind of bullish, and I said I don't think they go 10-2. I watched them play a complete performance, both offensively and defensively, against a pretty competent opponent. I might have changed my tune a little bit after watching that game. It's because the offense loses its starting quarterback and doesn't miss a beat. It doesn't miss a beat, and it continues its onslaught on defense. And if you can do that and then potentially make that game a little entertaining against Ohio State, I don't know if you're going to have the horses to keep up necessarily and just go blow for blow with Ohio State. But if you do, I think the tune about Indiana not just being a Cinderella story, but a legitimate contender, that would have to enter the equation. What say you?
They ought to finish the season 11-1 with their only loss being at Ohio State. I think 10-2 is probably the floor. Something would have to fall off more than just the quarterback for them to be 9-3. I think they're better than every team on their schedule, with the exception of the Buckeyes. I think Washington brings the challenge this coming weekend, but they're better than Michigan. And quite frankly, if they can score, Michigan can't score. And so I don't know. That's going to be very interesting because I mean, if they put up like half of their season average, like if they get into the high 20s, low 30s against Michigan, I don't know if Michigan can score enough. So that's a home game. And I will say this about the Hoosiers traveling to the Horseshoe to face Ohio State. I've been to a couple Indiana games at Ohio State. I don't know what it is. They always play them very tight and fall off completely in the fourth quarter. You can go back through the years. It's very odd.
Sure.
But maybe Signetti can make the difference in that fourth quarter, and we can see this game all the way through.
Yeah, Chris Signetti has to be the hottest coaching candidate coming out at this point right now. He's got to be right there on top of that list. But speaking of Michigan, oh Lord, how the mighty have fallen. 21-7 losers to Illinois. Illinois, Luke Altmaier is a good quarterback, right? But he doesn't even hit the 100-yard mark in this game, and they do that because the ball was rolling on the ground. Michigan it's in some dire straits right now. It's the fact that they couldn't get stops on defense, but on top of that, the offense is just abysmal. And it starts just because you don't have a quarterback. They don't have a guy who can do really anything. Jack Tuttle comes in there. He attempts 32 passes in this one and has an interception. They don't get in the end zone through the air. And then Donovan Edwards was somebody who a lot of people expected to carry the lion's share of this offense. He doesn't even get to the 50-yard threshold in this game. He only gets 7 carries. He's been completely usurped and replaced in that running back room. Kalel Moldings is that guy right now. And he's probably the only player on this team who puts together any semblance of a strong performance in this game. I mean, I understand you have a couple guys, Loveland, in that that receiver room, but look, Mullings is the only thing working for this offense, and even then it wasn't enough. I mean, they're in a difficult spot. Now they've fallen out of the top 25, and rightfully so. They've lost their 3rd game this season, and I mean, I pegged this team as an 8-4 team coming into this year, and I thought they were gonna scuffle a little bit, but I didn't think they would be nearly this bad.
No, we thought the run game would be better. We didn't think the offensive line, or excuse me, the quarterback would be quite this bad. I know we'd have a drop from McCarthy to whatever they're going to use, but we didn't think it'd be quite this bad. And quite frankly, they just have no ability to score whatsoever. This was a complete field position game, and Illinois played it smart, and they were careful. All they had to do is not set Michigan up, right? Like make Michigan work to score. That's what they did. They played it smart, and they were able to win this game very, very easily with a minimal performance on offense. Pathetic stuff from the Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah, no, it's bad just got worse over there in Ann Arbor, and I don't really have a lot of positive things to say about Sherrone Moore and the performances that this offense has put out. And I mean, look, I think things can get a little bit better next year. I think there's still a fine football program, and I think they'll be okay. This sort of the sort of growing pains are to be expected. You graduate that many players and you move on, and you're just resetting at so many different positions. But it's bad. It's pretty bad. And this football team, I don't expect to continue winning games with any sort of consistency. You have Indiana down the stretch, you've got Oregon down the stretch, and you've got Ohio State. Oh my God. I mean, it's kind of ugly right now. You should get to bowl eligibility, but the fact that we're talking about it things that way, I mean, you beat Michigan State, but that's a hate fest. And Michigan State would love nothing more than to really stick it to you. Jonathan Smith, I mean, like that's a guy who's trying to win over a fan base. You can do that in a big way on Saturday if you get a win over your arch nemesis. Well, Michigan State's arch nemesis, I should say. There's only one game on this schedule left that I see is like a legitimate, yep, that's a check mark of a win, and that's against Northwestern. That's not good if you're Michigan, especially if you're going to be clamoring for bowl eligibility at the end of the season. I thought it was hyperbole when I was discussing how bad this team could be this year, but bad got so much worse. But one thing that's getting a whole heck of a lot more entertaining is the race for the Big 12 championship. And Abe, this is where we'll finish before we get to our shout outs. I'm fascinated with what's going to happen in the Big 12 conference down the stretch. It is tight at the top. And BYU very nearly opened it up just a little bit more, but they get the win against Oklahoma State 38-35. And by an identical score, Iowa State gets a win 38-35 over UCF. Both of those games come down to the wire. And both of those teams very easily could have lost. But then you have your challengers. Those are your two favorites as of right now. But your challengers, one was Arizona State. They lose to Cincinnati. So now Cincinnati kind of jumps up into that realm of a 3-1 in the Big 12. Kansas State wins a big game over West Virginia, 45-18. I think Kansas State is only just now getting better. But then you have, Texas Tech, they lose a game here, 59-35 to Baylor, a really struggling Baylor team. Utah continues the bottom has fallen out there. They lose to TCU 13-7 in just a stinker of a football game. But I'm going to finish right here on this one. Colorado. I think it's time that we very really take this team seriously. I kind of slept on them for most of this season because I expect that was a team that won 4 games last year. They've already passed that mark and then some. 5-2 on the season, 3-1 in the Big 12. They are huge winners over Arizona, 34-7. And the race for the Big 12 championship is going to be as interesting as anywhere in the country. The quality of those teams, I don't think are that of the SEC or the Big 10 or anything like that, but who cares? It's going to be entertaining. It's going to be great football, and it's going to be fun to watch. And I wonder if anybody's going to be able to catch Iowa State or BYU because they both are in the driver's seat as of right now. But if they keep having finishes like they've had, like what they had last Saturday and Friday, I think we're in for a fun race.
Well, it's going to come down to Iowa State, and they've got a schedule that they're going to have to manage that will kind of make or break the rest of the conference. They can knock Cincinnati from the perch. They can knock Texas Tech from the perch. But at the end of the year, it's Kansas State, and that's the team that I'm still stuck on. They're the one that gave Colorado their loss. I know they got by BYU. We talked about that, but they're the team that it comes down to, in my opinion, with Iowa State. I think it's one of those three. I think it's BYU, Iowa State, and Kansas State. I do think there's a decent drop-off to that next group of Texas Tech and Colorado and whoever else you want to throw in there. Look, Iowa State played one of their worst games of the year, and they escaped with a win. And you talked about it. Good teams find ways to win when they don't have their best efforts. They certainly did not have their best efforts against UCF. There was, how many of these were defensive touchdowns? At least one. And that's right. The other one was dropped right before the end zone. They would whatever. That's its own discussion.
I don't know why people still do that crap.
That's its own discussion. They did eventually score on that drive. So essentially 2 defensive touchdowns, although one turned into a RJ Harvey 1-yard rushing. For Iowa State to be able to win a game in which they essentially had 2 pick sixes, very impressive comeback, final minute drive to score a go-ahead touchdown. Very impressive stuff. I'm still in on Kansas State, man. Now, like that's the squad. And BYU had to really get pushed there by Oklahoma State as well. So interesting stuff. I agree with you. Even the top teams are not where the SEC is or where the Big Ten is. But they're not far behind. They're definitely where the second tier of those conferences are. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, that's exactly the way I would say. Just you have your A tier, which is like your Ohio States, your Georgias, your Oregons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
They might be in that Penn State, Indiana, though, or the Tennessee, they're right there. They
might give them a run for the money. Like they're in that sort of category right there. But you look down the stretch here for these teams, and I'm just going to pick out the top 4. I don't necessarily think that Texas Tech or Cincinnati are in that discussion necessarily, right. But there is this BYU and Colorado. Neither of them play ranked opponents down the stretch, but we do get Colorado versus Texas Tech. We do get Colorado versus Cincinnati. Colorado is going to be a fun team to watch for the rest of the season. And I think the status of Travis Hunter is going to be an important thing to follow. It was going to be a tough sell that he was going to be able to play at that level on both sides of the ball for the remainder of the season. He, of course, does leave the game with an injury on Saturday. But I am circling one big game, and it was something I talked about in the preview show on Thursday. It was Kansas State and Iowa State. That game is one that could be played in consecutive weeks, but it's going to get testy down the stretch. I think the Big 12 conference it's going to be fun. It's going to be really fun to follow down the stretch. But let's jump into our week 8 shout outs. I'm going to jump in. I'll start here, Abe. It's the top 25. So everyone likes to talk as if this season's going to be the rekindling of what happened in 2007. Well, we're getting closer and closer and closer to that fact. I don't think we'll ever have anything quite as chaotic and insane as what we did have in that 2007 season, where teams just falling left and right, and we have number 1 seeds losing, and everybody else in the top 5 just getting obliterated, and we have a group of 5 teams and FCS teams beating Michigan and Ann Arbor. I mean, it was just an unbelievable season. But I will say this: it's the 3rd time this season that a number 1 team has lost. It's the first time that 4 different teams have been number 1 since 2012. I mean, it's interesting. And I don't know if it's going to be the last time that a number one team loses. I don't know if anybody's going to beat Oregon necessarily, but I do think it's very fun when you have constant reshuffling of the deck, especially up at the top. And the parity in college football right now is at an all-time high. But I do want to say this as well. Vanderbilt is ranked. Vanderbilt is ranked for the first time in a decade. First time since 2013 that they're in the top 25. Now they get Texas. So we'll see if that can keep rolling. If they want to continue being a giant killer, they'll have an opportunity to do it. They are winners last week against Ball State. Not a very attractive win, but they win. But the SEC and Big Ten, they continue to dominate the polls. 7 of the top 10 teams, 14 of the top 25 reside in those 2 conferences. And it's very clear that the class of the country are in the Big Ten and the SEC. Surprise to no one. But look, I think the top 25 is fun. It's at an interesting spot right now, and it'll get even more complicated next week. And I'll dig into some of those matchups here in just a second. But Abe, your week 8 shout outs. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Florida freshman. That's quarterback DJ Lagway and running back Jaden Ball. Ball had 5 touchdowns as a true freshman in this big win against Kentucky. And DJ Lagway, he didn't throw for any touchdowns. He did have an interception. But you see the energy. You see a big play offense starting to develop there for the Florida Gators. Elijah Badger went over nearly 150 yards on 3 catches. So they're starting to get it into gear. The defense performed well against Kentucky also. You kind of have to highlight it right now because Georgia's coming up, Texas is coming up, LSU after that, and Ole Miss before they get Florida State. So highlight it now. It might be tough going, but at the same time, as they develop, maybe a little surprise somewhere in one of those games. We'll find out.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. I know they got a head coach down there, Billy Napier, that is looking to keep his job. And if he can pull a rabbit out of a hat a couple of times down the stretch.
Should have gone for 2 against Tennessee, you bum.
We'll see. We'll see. All right. But I do want to shout out what we got coming up next week. It is the week 9 preview show coming up later on this week. So make sure you follow along. Like the podcast at college. Or it's College Football Overtime. It's our week 9 preview show coming up later on this week. We have 5 top 25 matchups. Illinois is going on the road. They're playing Oregon. We talked about Oregon potentially maybe or maybe not having an upset loss coming up somewhere on that schedule. If we want to get the number 5 team, I guess the 5th team, 5th time we've had a different team at number 1, but it would be probably 4 different teams still stay that way. But Texas and Vanderbilt, they're taking each other on. LSU at Texas A&M is probably going to be our game of the week. It has one of the it's been a very fun series just between those 2. So I think that's going to be a really fun one to watch. Notre Dame and Navy, another big surprise. Navy and Army. Navy's first real test of the season is going to come up. They've got Notre Dame, and then it's Missouri and it's Alabama. 2 teams going in the wrong direction, but 2 teams that can keep their season on the rails. We'll discuss all of that right here on the College Football Overtime podcast. So make sure to follow along, like, subscribe. We'll have a lot of fun, and I hope you did too. Thank you so much for joining us on our Week 8 reaction show. My name is Garrett Chapman for Abe Gordon. We are College Football Overtime. We will see you again here very soon. Lots of college football left this season. You got to follow along. We'll see you again very soon. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.